these ideas that we were discussing. And so, yes, thank you. Now we will turn the time over to Mr. Astorga.
Thank you so much, Mayor and Council. I do have a presentation. There we go, short-term rentals in Bountiful City. We want to start out just by giving you a quick time frame, not time frame, but a specific period of Airbnbs in Bountiful City. I'd like to start with, just to give you a quick idea. When we go to Airbnb.com, as you zoom into the map, they start coming up. So this does not represent how many they have. We did this analysis when we went before the Planning Commission, which was the 15th of March with 60 listings. Just for kicks, we did it again today, and that jumped up to 72. We did not expect the big change in that. Just food for thought. This is just 1 week versus last week. We also did the same with vacation rental by owner or Verbo. The number didn't change. It stayed at 21, even though some of the components did change on that. And this is just to give you a quick idea of what's going on. Obviously, Airbnb's been around longer than vacation rental by owner. They have a lot more rented on their website. And also, we need to point out that many of these are simply repeats. You're able to list them on both is what I understand. Starting on how we got here, as you recall, last October, we adopted another round of amendments to our ADU ordinance as mandated by HB 82. During that last public hearing, we came up with the city planner's recommendation of why we should prohibit short-term rentals from ADUs. The logic that I had back then was simply following up on the purpose of offering long-term rentals of 30 consecutive days or longer. That's what HB 82 indicated word for word. However, they didn't say that it would be expressly prohibited. They let municipalities decide whether we want to do that or not. Anyways, we then decided to move forward and try to, for lack of a better term, solve the no policy issue that we have in Bountiful City, in that our zoning code, our land use code, does not indicate whether it's allowed or not. Instead of treating it like anything not listed herein is expressly prohibited, on the same token that it also doesn't mention anything about long-term rentals, my interpretation of the code, which was consistent with a former planning director, was to not do anything about that. On that same token, I need to say that no one prior to that or to date has come in and said, here's my business license for my short-term rental. So we haven't had to deny anyone due to lack of enabling codes codes for that. But we knew that we had to do something about it. By the way, short-term rentals is not anything new as a recent change to what we do on our cell phones and technology. They've been around for quite some time. We just never had an opportunity to properly address them. We do recognize that. And please, council, interrupt me at any time if you have any questions. Thank you. Moving on to a work session discussion that we had with the Planning Commission in January of this year. We became more acquainted with short-term rentals. We shared trends associated with short-term rentals, and we looked at various other codes. Food for thought, West Valley City, which is a city much larger than us. They're the second biggest city in the state as far as population. They have the same policy as we have, which is we have no policy. I thought that was very interesting given their population over 100,000 people. So I thought that was fairly interesting. So with the Planning Commission, we looked at many different codes, and we had a really good work session discussion with them. Again, be better acquainted with it and to try to compare trends as far as regulations and what people do and what people don't do. We actually move forward, and we noticed a public hearing where we introduced the language that was published in your packet as policy discussion, and the Planning Commission moved forward with a 4-0 vote to move forward. They had some minor tweaks. I'm going to go over those tweaks with you, and they've also been represented on the staff report. I think I labeled them in red, and we'll simply go from there. This exercise was great. We did this with the Planning Commission where we identified the benefits of long-term rental versus short-term rental. Both of them, as you can see in the middle, they assist in home ownership and also as having some sort of cash flow. Obviously, the short-term rental income does fluctuate, while the long-term rental is more of a fixed income. The long-term rental is used at, even though it's still a business, it's more looked at as residential purposes versus a short-term rental, which is more like a hotel model, more of a business point of view. Obviously, it's priced nightly. We have a lease agreement, actually on both. And then on long-term rental, it's typically occupied for 12 months or longer. Usually we sign that 1-year lease, and then we go from month to month. And obviously, short-term rental is, the current industry definition is anything that's 30 days or less. Some municipalities do codify it as 45. So we could do it as we see fit. When we add in an ADU, long-term rental, versus a short-term rental, we discuss another component, which it does provide an affordable housing. And this correlation is simply based on size. The smaller the unit, it tends to be more affordable. There is no specific data that I can show you. This is just the same policy, not policy, but this is the same interpretation that we have in regards to our moderate income housing, which is based on our stock of multifamily residential units and also duplexes and whatnot. So there is an added benefit as far as an ADU being identified as a long-term rental. Moving on to a document that we received from the Utah League of Cities and Towns a year ago, almost, yeah. They were in the process of, obviously, we have a housing crisis. They were trying to address housing affordability. So they started looking at the displacing effect of short-term rentals we're having on long-term rentals. So then the league created a subgroup, a work group, hired the Gardner Policy Institute to come up with an inventory of housing units and short-term rentals. Some of the quick takeaways here are the increase from 2019 through 2021, which is about 27%. The big 5 counties that were hit big or significantly by the increase of 73%. They had an interesting number of 92% of short-term rentals were classified as the entire home. I do need to back up just a little bit. Based on our research, Airbnb does let you list a room for a short-term rental, while Vrbo doesn't, by the way. So I do need to point that out. Here we're looking at this specific number for the entire home at 92%. Moving on to what is happening more of our tourist destinations throughout the state in Summit County and Grand County. So where does Bountiful fit in here? They estimated.
Francisco, can you go back to that?
Sure.
And just point out what those resort communities are seeing as far as
Sure.
the percent of units that are being turned into short-term rentals.
Right. So, and Park City has struggled with this for quite some time, based on that 21% of Summit County being that 43% found within Park City.
Did the Gardner Institute not find a causal relationship because they didn't ask that question?
Correct. And then we're looking at Grand County with 20% in Grand County, same thing with the 11.5 being in Moab.
So I know it's not applicable to Bountiful because we're not a resort community, but I think it's astounding that, when you look at Grand County, so that's Moab, right? 20% of all of the housing stock are short-term rentals. 11% in Moab of the entire housing stock are rentals for short-term rentals, not for long-term rentals, right? And this is one of those policy questions. The reason the league asked this question, and this survey, we just got these results last month and a half ago, was to understand, do short-term rentals have an impact on the availability and number of affordable housing units? And it's pretty clear from their research that in certain counties, Salt Lake, Washington, Summit, and Grand, absolutely, it's reducing the stock of affordable housing. That's not necessarily the case in some of the less tourist-oriented counties, but statewide, I asked Francisco to put these in because I wanted you to see statewide, what the trends are. Thanks, Francisco.
Thank you, Gary.
Could I ask a question, make a comment maybe? I think that we also have to take into account as part of that equation that a lot of these homes, at least two of them in my extended family, were second homes that have now been monetized and turned into short-term rentals. It didn't take any housing stock away in those instances. And I think that it's important that we understand that a lot of these may not be homes removed from the available housing stock.
And I
They
think
could be second homes that are now being used as income opportunities.
And I think you are right, and that applies to the entire home, but it doesn't necessarily apply to the ADU.
Right. Great point.
Sorry, Francisco, is there any disaggregated information about what Richard's pointing to with the, second homes that were already vacation home or second property that then converted into a VRBO? Do you know if they looked at that or if they were just being purchased for investment opportunities for this purpose?
I don't think I or even the league or even the institute is able to answer that question. It's too deep to find out how the purpose of that turnover.
The data that the league shared does not distinguish between primary residents and secondary residents or those that were not on the market beforehand or not. It does show the increase in the number of units, and I suppose you could look at a correlation potentially, but the study doesn't do it, of the number of, for example, homes that were secondary units compared to the number of those of homes, like if they grew by 5%, let's say in a community, but the number of short-term rentals increased by 20%, that would indicate that you've got more units that are turning into short-term rentals that weren't previously there. But that data doesn't exist, so sorry.
And on that data, they did point out that 92% are classified as the entire home. So that would make that assumption that obviously that's a second home if it's the entire home. Looking at our Airbnb and our VRBO data, one snapshot, that's what I was trying to say earlier, snapshot in time, it's about 30% of what we see in Bountiful City listed as an entire home. We can go back to those, about 33%. Again, one snapshot today, one snapshot last week. So
You'll get tired of hearing from me. I apologize for interrupting again.
I don't think I can get tired for that.
In our travels to various states, we found that anywhere you can put a door that separates the home into two, that's considered now the entire home, each half of that home. So there's that as well. Anyway.
So if you don't mind, we're going to go into Davis County data. So as of 2020, they estimated 74 short-term rentals, which is 0.5% of our housing stock. This is how we compare to the rest of Davis County with that 0.5, that 0.5% in Bountiful. If you look at the trend of the county, we're towards the higher end. The other one that matches our 5% is North Salt Lake, and then I see South Weber with 0.6%. And then the state analysis is on the very bottom. They did this on every single municipality and came up with this data based on our approximately 16,000 units of housing stock. So why I wanted to show you this, and it goes back to the recommendation that we had with ADUs, and obviously this is a legislative item. I do believe that we need to have a policy instead of saying we don't have a policy yet we won't issue a business license. So we did move forward, and we did draft an ordinance that would create a process for short-term rentals to be allowed. And as we created this process, we had identified 3 or 4 items that we usually get concerns with. I spent a significant amount of time working in Park City where these were the big 4 that would always come in from neighbors of short-term rentals. First one and foremost is parking too much. They're parking illegally. We do get we do get some calls that instead of going over to the police department, somehow they make it into my office regarding winter parking. In my experience in Park City, again, the complaint was the people are just partying until 2 a.m. on a Wednesday night. And then the absentee landlord, but we talked about this in great detail with the Planning Commission. This is not exclusive to short-term rentals. When that landlord is not there, there's another correlation with sometimes the lawn doesn't get taken care of or the garbage can lives out on the street. These are the major concerns that we identified that a neighborhood would be impacted if a short-term rental is allowed. The big elephant in the room is that the solve-all solution for ADUs was the owner-occupied. And we love that solution. It was a great solution. And obviously, it would mitigate the ADU. But when you have the entire home, you do not have the option of having that site be owner-occupied. So we're going to move on to what we proposed. These are just some standard terms that we codified last time. We may come back to them. I don't think we have this issue anymore where we were talking about an ADU when we actually meant a short-term rental. I think we're all on the same page. It took a little bit for even the public or the people going through my office requesting for ADUs to be able to differentiate the two. I put the slide just in case we needed to go back to it. So the proposed short-term ordinance, which was placed in your packet, has 6 principles, and we're going to go over all of them one by one, depending on how much time. Oh, we're doing good on time. We're doing really good. Let me go back. Just a quick intro. We think it would be appropriate to only allow them in single-family dwellings or in zones that accommodate, that have an allowed use for a single-family dwelling and also for single-family dwellings and approved ADUs. It would be approved via a short-term rental application that would be reviewed by the administrative committee. We would notify neighbors of upcoming applications, and we would require that the property owner is aware of certain regulations, and we would also require that the property owner shares information with the renters. This is different than if you buy a house in Bountiful. You're not required to do anything. You're not required to become familiar with our parking code. You're not required to become familiar with the noise ordinance. You're not required to do anything. You just buy a home. This is an added requirement via an affidavit that the property owner would sign that says, I am aware of these regulations. Go ahead.
Are we going through the entire report, or are
I am-
questions appropriate during the?
I am planning on going through every aspect of it.
Okay,
So-
so, wait,
If,
okay.
your call.
Okay,
Your question is about like a specific.
it is, yeah, it is about a
We're gonna-
specific component, so wait, I'll wait.
So the first one,
Don't wait.
Okay, I'm not going to wait. Okay, I've got a question. So with the proposed code, you're saying that it would be for single-family homes or ADUs within a single-family residence?
correct.
Or an ADU within
Correct.
a single-family residence. So I know that other cities have all kinds of different things. Some have short-term rentals that are allowed only in duplexes or only in multifamily housing, and some include all. I'm curious as to why that is the recommendation as opposed to all the housing stock in Bountiful?
Yeah, great question. The quick answer is, it's because of our stock of moderate income housing, which we have that same correlation that it takes place in a, more likely in a multifamily residential apartment, or, in multifamily residential or in a duplex other than a single-family dwelling. That was our logic. Our first logic is for purposes of moderate income housing. The second one was to mitigate impacts associated with that short-term rental. If there's a party, if things get not wild, but noisier, in a single-family residential neighborhood, we have to adhere to setbacks. There's better separation than just a wall that separates two families, or two different rentals of any sort. So our logic was twofold, was again, on that same correlation of moderate income housing, as well as to try to mitigate impacts. And usually in other municipalities, it always starts out with allowed in a single-family dwelling, and then some other cities allow them in duplexes and then multifamily dwellings. It's not usually where they're allowed in multifamily and not in a single-family dwelling. Usually it starts at the base, which is a single-family dwelling. But that was our logic, to further mitigate impacts associated with the use, and also to try to keep a higher, try to keep units from being turned over from long-term rental to short-term. That was the logic.
So,
No, you go.
well, I'm just, so I understand the concern. When I think about the moderate income component of that, so many people, and it was noted on your diagram, that so many people are wanting to do Verbo or Airbnb to supplement, right, for added income. And so, to me, the ability of somebody who lives in a duplex or multifamily housing, it really plays to, if they have that ability, that can help them with that moderate income, adding income, especially when 67% are not whole home here in Bountiful. They're, more the Airbnb model. And I'm just wondering, with mitigation of impacts, I know when this was discussed back in October, or was it October or November? I'm not sure, but that the police chief was asked if there had been specific complaints regarding Verbos and Airbnbs, and at that time he had said no. I was wondering if and he was asked or tasked with specifically looking at that to see if there were noise complaints, criminal complaints, unruly behavior. I don't know what it would all be, but if then, since from then till now, if that's been tracked, and if there is a legitimate worry there, that we need to mitigate impacts.
So, yeah, on your first comment, we agree that renting part of your house, it does assist you in that home ownership and making that mortgage payment. It does supplement. We're further saying that if it is a long-term rental, it also provides on the receiving end an affordable unit. That's we don't disagree with what you're saying. We're just saying that if it's a short-term rental, it does take away a unit that would be available, that would most likely be smaller and therefore would be affordable.
But we're the whole home, is what you're saying more. If it were a whole home rental, the whole residence, then it takes it out of the house.
No, you're right,
stock.
and it goes back to Richard's comment earlier today. No, you're right on that. Sorry, I was thinking about ADUs. And my recollection regarding the chief's comment is that up until that point, when he was asked to come up back in October, November, there was no way that we track. At the time, our police department didn't track short-term rentals different than long-term rentals. I believe that was part of what he described.
And nor do we now, because we still don't have an ordinance
Correct.
that distinguishes what a short-term rental is. So until we have an ordinance identifying whether or not they exist, and then we really can't track we don't make that distinction.
Right. The police officer is not trained or would not come in and say, are you here on a short-term basis? He was more there to say, keep it down, is more so how the cases were identified. That's what I recollect from what Chief Beeler indicated.
If I may follow up to that, because that segues into my question, as we're talking about this big picture.
Let me go back, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Just as we are going through this proposed code, I just want to, is there a plan to put fines in place or something along those lines to track complaints so we can have a better understanding on what, was exactly my question. So just as we're looking at this big picture, is that also in the cards?
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Through
Okay.
through the approval process, we would be able to track exactly where we approved them. They would no longer be rogue short-term rentals. They would be approved or not approved. And with that, we could do some better tracking. The city prosecutor is the one that gets in charge of going after people for not complying with the code. The very general code provision indicates that if you don't comply with any component of the zoning code, you could get a Class C misdemeanor. That's not up to me, that's up to the city prosecutor to enforce.
And-
We don't have a set process that says if you don't comply with X, you get to pay this. That we don't have a fine component.
So I wanted to follow up, if it's okay with you, Councilwoman, on that question. It seems to me, I'm still not comfortable that we are giving our residents that might live next to a short-term rental that are having concerns with parking or partying any real recourse. And I'm still not comfortable that we have a robust code enforcement to ensure that I can offer them that comfort in adopting a policy. So I would be interested in seeing something come back in the next iteration that includes an outline of fines or fees that might be able to be applied, or some realistic expectation that a business license might be pulled, and therefore they would be operating an illegal short-term rental for, hitting some type of threshold of violations. And because I don't see that, and because we're not, it would be up to the city prosecutor to apply this misdemeanor standard. That is still of a concern to me. I have a couple other things they're not all in the same area, but I don't want to deviate from this topic if people are still
Francisco,
on this.
I'm just wondering, what do you think? I know that the council members have many different good questions, but I don't know that Francisco has been made it through his presentation. So what do you recommend? Do you want to just continue with your
Yeah.
presentation and then we can get to questions, or?
I think that would be wise, yeah.
Okay, all right. If you don't mind, if you council members are okay with that.
I'm comfortable with that, with the caveat that if we need to move, back to the council meeting, that perhaps we think about coming back to this topic, because this is a big meaty one, and I don't want
Yes.
the closure of the work session, if we're not done with the discussion, to indicate that we are then ready to have this be presented in a council meeting for action.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it deserves our full, all of our questions, and so we can come back to it if we need to.
All right, so the first part of it is just the basic definition. B is simply the administrative committee approves it. C is we notify property owners. We propose within 100 feet of the upcoming meeting. Planning Commission recommended to change that to 300 feet. And this is a public meeting. Next one, it needs to come back with the following standards: allowed in single-family residential, the R, the RM, and the downtown. Why these zones? Because these are the only ones that allow single-family dwellings. We're just trying to be consistent with the recommendation. The next one is exactly the same thing, only allowed in single-family dwellings or accessory dwelling units. This is just simply consistent with how we updated our zoning code. This is just a response of you can't have an accessory use on a site without having a primary dwelling. So we're just being consistent on that. The next one is parking.
Francisco, on that point, so
Oh, I
that
can
would,
come back, I'm sorry.
so that would prohibit, for example, somebody putting a trailer on a lot and renting it as a short-term rental, correct?
Yes, but also, it is not allowed currently in our code to live in a trailer in a Bountiful lot. You can store it in your site, in your house, in your property, but you can't live in it. But this would also strengthen that. Thank you, Gary. The next one is parking. Currently, the parking standard for a single-family dwelling are 4 parking spaces are required. We are saying that if you're renting the entire house and you have 4 bedrooms, we're not changing the parking. We're not adding another parking spot. We're saying that for every 2 bedrooms that you provide, so the example is you have a 6-bedroom house, then we're adding the parking requirement by 1. Instead of 4, you need 5 parking spaces. We added the language in purple there, I think it's purple, indicating that when we approved the ADU ordinance, it required 1 additional parking space for that ADU. We don't want to touch that. We just want to leave that as is. The next one is just a reminder of what our current parking limitations are. This is part of what the property owner is required to acknowledge that they're aware of. I don't want to spend too much time on this one. I can if you need me to. This is just our current code, our current parking and limitations. The next one is noise. We are proposing language that says no, the use of sound equipment, sound-related activities, and/or noise heard from the property line from 11 to 6 shall be prohibited. Why 11 to 6? We simply chose to be consistent with our noise ordinance, where we already prohibit 4 activities, as shown on the screen here, from 11 to 6. Again, this is not, we're just trying to be consistent with these provisions already found in the code, just to allow the police department to have consistent hours of quiet time. This one goes in lines with that absentee landlord, so the garbage can doesn't live on the street. It's a simple one-liner reminder, going back to what our garbage container collection policy really is the night before, and you're supposed to put it back that same day of garbage pickup. Didn't know that before this. And the same thing applies to landscaping and maintenance. The last 2 are obviously not a renter responsibility, but they're a property owner responsibility, not intended for the ADU folks because they live there. It's more for the absentee landlord. Again, when you buy a house, you're not required to read these components or become familiar with them. We want to give an opportunity to work on communication so they know what the rules are. This is it, the property owner awareness. Property owner shall acknowledge in writing that they're aware of all the regulations listed herein, specifically on-street parking, noise ordinance, garbage container, and landscaping ordinance. So this would be an affidavit that they sign in my office. And the next one, this was simply a typo that I had, and the Planning Commission caught it, so good for them. Prior to STR occupancy, the property owner shall place a notice behind the main short-term rental door to make occupants aware of parking and noise. The planning department, we want to be the ones that produce a little sign that they place it right behind the front door, very similar to the hotel emergency access plan that they put behind all the hotel rooms. So we want to give an opportunity for that renter to become aware with our parking and our noise regulations. And we also want them to use any means necessary. Sometimes they have a booklet, sometimes it's just on their website. It varies from short-term rental to short-term rental, how they share information with their renters, and we just want to work on communication, bringing that information forward to the renters. The next one is just a simple reminder. If you have an ADU, don't forget about the ADU ordinance. It's a simple reminder for the reader. And the next one is regarding non-conforming uses or non-compliant structures. The whole purpose of those uses that are specified as non-conforming is that over time they're supposed to go away. Food for thought, or a quick example, I have 3 lots in the commercial district that are single-family dwellings. We don't want to give them another opportunity, another right, another incentive to remain in place while we already decided whenever we rezone that property that they should be commercial, they shouldn't have a residence, or there shouldn't be a single-family dwelling. We don't want to provide that incentive. So that's why we simply said, if you have any sort of nonconformity, you don't qualify for a short-term rental. That's the principle on that. It's based on communication, so we don't want this permit to transfer with the land. We want it to remain with that property owner. If that property turns over, then we start from scratch, because it all goes back to that communication of owner aware of the rules, and they're gonna comply with the rules. We don't want it to be more like a conditional use permit or something that gets vested forever in essence. And the next one, we're almost done here. We believe that it would be appropriate to have them get a yearly business license for code enforcement purposes, if they're ignoring our phone calls, if they're ignoring our letters, so we can simply pull their business license as a tool for this. And the last item, I think here, if this gets approved before the budget process, we do want to be able to charge a fee that's somehow somewhere codified. And that's why we put it in the land use code for now. It's just a placeholder. It would eventually go on the fee schedule, whatever fee that is. And that's about it, other than I gotta let you know that state code prohibit code enforcement through internet listings. We cannot use the internet for that. They're more complaint-based by neighbors through that. We cannot use the internet for that. And we're here for you to provide direction and guidance regarding this. We took a different approach than taking it before the Planning Commission and then having a full-blown public hearing and coming to you. We are doing this work session between the two for you to be able to provide direction and guidance on this topic. Once we're ready for a public hearing, we will go ahead, notice a public hearing before City Council, and we'll simply go from there. That's it. That's my presentation.
Thank you
I'll be
so
more than happy to
much.
answer any questions.
What questions do you have, Council?
Transient room tax. I didn't see transient room tax applications in the proposed ordinance.
Yeah, so it's a 1% maximum increase that you could enact via ordinance or resolution. It's the same tax that gets applied towards hotels, motels, or short-term rentals.
So this is something where, in Francisco's Venn diagram, short-term rental is intended to operate like a business, stands, in place of a hotel. Hotels are subject to a transient room tax. My understanding is that Airbnb and VBRO platforms have the capability to capture that with the other fees that might be passed through the app. If we're to move forward with this ordinance, I think it would be something important for us to discuss whether there truly is going to be that level playing field and whether a transient room tax ought to be applied.
I agree. I think it'd be worth exploring and with, especially with the idea that it would come with additional cost to planning and staff to review, and that could help offset that expense or burden to the city.
On that same comment, I don't believe that I answer Segura Bar's comment regarding, I'm sorry, how we keep track of these. Or did I? I'm sorry.
You indicated that at some point there would be a discussion on how we would want to have repercussions for people who break the code, whether it's revoking a business license or fines or something along those lines, because I think that definitely needs to be on the table.
Right, and to, go back to that. The process allows us to keep track of the ones. The business license allows us to, each business owner now would be able to go to the state, get that employer identification number in order for them to set up, if the council were to move forward with a future TRT tax, transient room tax. That's how it would be set up. through that business license that they'd have to get through my office.
So I'm still, I guess, since the legislature has tied the hands of municipalities to use online listings as any type of an enforcement mechanism, we're left with, only resident complaints would be a complaint-driven process. That's how we would be made aware that there is a short-term rental, and then reach out to the property owner to say you need to obtain a business license and come into conformity with our ordinance. But I'm still concerned, I guess, that we're going to miss a number of them, especially since the number changed in a matter of a few days. I'm concerned that I'd rather a tighter enforcement mechanism with some type of fines or a series of strikes before someone's business license might be revoked that we would see in our ordinance. Because I'm just very concerned that we're not known necessarily for having robust code enforcement, and we are introducing businesses throughout our single-family zones. We wouldn't otherwise introduce a business use throughout single-family zones. So I'm concerned that we don't see that yet in the proposal. Would like to see the TRT included in the proposal as well.
I would support what Councilwoman Bradshaw is saying about the transient room tax. I know that when this has been discussed before, there have been discussions about owner occupancy, for having an owner-occupant component to the STRs. And, some of those concerns are preservation of neighborhood feel, avoiding those kind of ghost streets, inflation, et cetera. With such a small number, I'm not sure, and maybe to require that at this point would be trying to fix a problem that we're not sure that we have with requiring owner occupancy, but I want to acknowledge that that is something that has been discussed, and that some people have indicated there's a desire to have that. I think perhaps mitigating or something that could address that would go along with what Councilwoman Bradshaw is saying, is if we were to have an enforcement, that one component could be, because I worry about the angry neighbor problem with, maybe there isn't a problem, but somebody is utilizing this enforcement mechanism maybe to, they're just angry that it's on their street. And one way we could track is you're already having, if, with your proposal that owners would have to sign an affidavit. If they were to also be required to submit an affidavit every year showing how many days and what days, they had occupants in their STR. So then if we do get code enforcement complaints, we can go back and look and say, oh, well, look, there wasn't anybody there, or it was, I don't know if that's but it could be self-reporting. It wouldn't add additional work. I would just say, again, this idea of leveling the playing field, I would really personally love to see that if we allow this in the city for single-family dwellings, that we should also allow it in duplexes and multifamily housing.
Can I ask a question there? Councilmember Price-Hewish, multifamily housing, how much of our housing stock of multifamily is owner-occupied? I mean, I don't know that it's a very large percentage, and folks who are renting certainly can't list their place as a short-term rental. So I don't know what
I don't
size
have
of a
those
problem that
figures.
might be.
But that would be good information to get. What percentage is owner occupied of duplexes, condo units, those types of things?
It looks like we're up against the time to start our regular council meeting, so I'm just wondering, it seems to me like we still have more discussion on this item. Is that how the council feels?
Yes, that's how I feel.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm just wondering if it works to insert the continuation of discussion on this after number 8 on the agenda? Does that sound okay, Gary?
Am I still around?
Certainly, we can put it wherever you want, and
Okay.
I'm just looking to see who might be here for an agenda item that might not want to wait through that. If you don't mind, maybe just let me take a peek at it
Sure,
for a minute, and
okay.
but I
We'll
think that probably
establish
works.
at the beginning of the meeting when we'll continue this discussion. But I was just hoping that, I know there are some people that are here for this discussion. I don't want them to have to wait until the very end of the meeting. So we will announce just in a second when we start our regular council meeting when this item will be continued on the agenda for tonight, and just shortly. And we will break now to set up for our regular council meeting, which will start in just a minute. Thank you.
Thank you.